A man's boots were sitting in the vestibule of his tent. His wallet was in the interior pocket with $40 and his driver's license. His food was sealed in the bear canister. He stepped outside, barefoot, for just a moment, and he never came back. And someone at a desk in San Francisco wrote voluntary departure on a form and filed it in a box in a building that nobody was supposed to open. I know this because I opened it, and that man was one of 216. The combination lock on building 2217 was 5831. That's what the work order said. That's what I typed into my phone the morning of September 11th, 2023, standing outside a utility storage annex 40 yards behind the main maintenance compound in Yosemite Village. I had a dolly, a pry bar, and a box of contractor bags. The morning air still carried the overnight cool, 48 degrees, but I could already feel the sun building heat against the cinder block wall. The lock opened on the first try. The hasp was slightly rusted but functional, and the door behind it hadn't been opened in at least 3 years. I want to be precise about what I found in there and when I found it, because the sequence matters. Nobody at the Park Service has asked me to recount these events in the correct order. They've asked me to recount them in an order that makes their response look timely. Those aren't the same thing. And the difference between those two versions is the reason I'm telling this story now, to you, instead of to an investigator in an office where something might actually be done. My name is Paul Kessler. In September 2023, I was a WG5 maintenance worker for the National Park Service at Yosemite, seasonal second year. I cleaned bathrooms at 4 in the morning before the valley filled up with visitors, then spent the rest of my 10-hour shift on whatever the work order board had waiting. Replacing toilet cartridges in employee housing, painting bear boxes in the campgrounds, hauling busted picnic tables, unclogging drains in the Curry Village shower house. The invisible labor that makes a national park function while everyone else photographs waterfalls. Building 2217 was a single-story cinder block rectangle with a corrugated metal roof, built sometime in the 50s or 60s as overflow storage for the main utility building the park calls Fort Yosemite. It sat in a gravel lot screened from the visitor center by a row of incense cedars, tall, fragrant trees that blocked the sight lines from every pedestrian path. Most visitors never knew Building 2217 existed. Most employees didn't either. It wasn't on the regular maintenance rotation. Nobody checked it, cleaned it, or inventoried it. It just sat there behind those cedars, accumulating decades of institutional junk, like a closet nobody opens in a house nobody owns. The work order was to clear the building for asbestos abatement. 3 days, solo, cataloging, and removing everything inside so the remediation crew could tent the structure the following Monday. My supervisor, Dale, handed me the assignment on a Monday morning in the maintenance office, a cramped room with a whiteboard full of daily tasks and a coffee maker nobody had cleaned since the 90s. Dale was in his 50s, beard going gray, the kind of career NPS maintenance guy who'd been in the valley so long he could tell you which toilet in which campground was going to fail based on the sound it made. He was a decent supervisor, didn't hover. If the work got done and you didn't create a safety hazard, you had your space. He said Building 2217 hadn't been opened in at least 3 years, possibly longer. The previous crew had used it for surplus furniture, holiday decorations for the employee rec center, and broken equipment waiting to be surplused through the federal disposal system. He said I'd probably find mice. Anything with a serial number or property tag went on the inventory sheet. Anything without one was trash. He gave me the combination on a sticky note, a clipboard with a form, and told me to take my time. I want to describe the morning of September 11th in detail because the sensory specifics matter. They anchor what came later in a physical reality that I need you to understand was ordinary, was normal, was a day like any other day in the most beautiful place I'd ever lived. September in Yosemite Valley is still summer. The days are hot, the sky is deep blue, and the valley floor sits in a bowl of granite that collects and radiates heat like a kiln. By the time I walked to building 2217 at 7:30, the air was already warming. I could smell hot pine resin, that sweet, sharp amber scent that comes off ponderosa bark when the sun hits it. I could smell the chalky mineral scent of the Merced River on running low, pale granite cobbles exposed along its banks. The shuttle buses were circulating on the loop road, diesel engines humming. I passed two tour groups near the visitor center, a family searching for the missed trail parking, and a woman in flip-flops who asked me if the bathrooms were open. I was in my NPS maintenance screens. She assumed I knew everything about the park. I pointed her toward the village store restrooms and kept walking. Building 2217 sat at the far end of the gravel lot. The padlock was a heavy master combination lock, brass body, black dial. The door was a metal fire door, painted brown to match the NPS earth tone palette. It stuck when I pushed it, not locked, just swollen in its metal frame from years of temperature cycling and disuse. I put my shoulder into it, and it scraped open across concrete with a long, slow exhalation, releasing a breath of stale, cool air that rolled over me and hit me with a smell I recognized: old cardboard, mouse urine, sharp, ammoniac, and underneath both, something dusty and institutional that I knew from county buildings and old libraries: paper, a massive quantity of old paper. The interior was a single room, roughly 30 by 50 feet, bare fluorescent lighting that flickered twice before stabilizing. Concrete floor stained with old watermarks along the back wall, cobwebs between the light fixtures, mouse droppings along the baseboards. The air was close and still and 10 degrees cooler than outside, the cinder block walls holding the night. The front half was what Dale had described: surplus furniture, metal desks with chipped paint, stacking chairs, a broken water cooler, two empty filing cabinets with their drawers hanging open. Against the left wall, a pallet of roofing shingles in yellowed shrink wrap, a garbage bag of tangled Christmas lights, a box of outdated trail maps from 2006. Normal maintenance storage. I started cataloging, working front to back, tagging anything with a property sticker, bagging the rest. The back half was different: a floor to ceiling steel shelf unit, government issue, 5 shelves high, 12 feet across, ran the full width of the back wall, and on every shelf, filling every available space, were banker's boxes. Standard issue archival storage, tan cardboard with metal reinforced corners. They were dusty, a uniform gray layer over the tan, but structurally intact. Not water damaged, not disintegrating, just old and profoundly undisturbed. I counted them: 43 boxes. Each had a handwritten label on the short end facing outward, marker on masking tape. Most were numbers and a name, sometimes a date. I assumed procurement files or maintenance records, the kind of paperwork that accumulates everywhere in federal government and eventually migrates to the darkest corner available because nobody has authority to shred it. Every government building has a closet like this. Paper flows downhill until it finds a dark corner and stops. I pulled the first box to check for a property tag. None. I logged it as uncatalogued surplus, checked for mouse damage, and opened the lid. Inside were manila file folders standing upright, packed tight enough that they didn't slump. Each tab had a name in ballpoint pen and a date. The first folder was about 3/4 of an inch thick. I opened it on top of the box. A Park Service incident report form, the old multi-part carbon type, yellowed but legible. Case number, date, reporting officer, incident location. Behind it, handwritten interview notes on yellow legal pad paper, a photocopied backcountry permit, a Xeroxed topographic map section with a hand-drawn red circle around a drainage on the north rim, and 3 Polaroid photographs clipped together with a binder clip. The report was for a missing person, a 22-year-old male, last seen on the Snow Creek Trail, August 19th, 1979. The Polaroids showed the Snow Creek trailhead, a dusty parking area with a wooden sign, a campsite with a green canvas tent and a blue external frame pack leaning against a tree, and a stretch of trail above the switchbacks where someone had placed a small orange surveyor's flag on a stick, marking something on the ground. The handwritten notes were thorough: 2 witness statements, a search timeline, radio log excerpts, weather conditions, and at the bottom of the last page, in different handwriting, smaller, neater, blue ballpoint instead of the black pen used above, a single notation: closed, October 3rd, 79, NFA, no further action. I looked at that notation for a long moment. Then I put the folder back and pulled the next one. Another missing person, a 46-year-old woman, last seen near Tenaya Lake, July 1981. Same structure, same ending, closed, NFA. I went through 6 more folders, all missing persons, all from the late 70s and early 80s, all closed the same way. And the 5th folder, I recognized the name. Not because I knew the person, because I'd seen it on the NPS website. The previous winter, during a rainy week in February, I'd been reading about the park's history online and found the Yosemite missing persons page. That name was still listed, officially open, officially unsolved, officially still missing. But in my hand was a file that said the case had been closed in 1983 with no further action and a single sentence. Concluded subject left park voluntarily. No evidence of foul play or distress. I stopped pulling folders. I stood there with dust on my fingers, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the building warming as the sun heated the metal roof. Outside, shuttle buses, a maintenance truck starting in the compound, a woodpecker in the cedars. Normal Tuesday morning in Yosemite Valley, and I was holding a file that said a person listed as missing on the Park Service's own website had been quietly closed out 40 years ago and shelved in a building behind a row of trees. I closed the box, put it back, walked outside into heat that hit like a wall after the cool interior, and called Dale on the radio. He picked up on the second call. I told him I'd found boxes of old paperwork, incident reports, case files, law enforcement material. He paused, 3 full seconds of dead air. Then he said to leave it alone. He'd make a call, keep working on the front half. He'd get back to me. I went back inside, worked the furniture for an hour, loaded desk frames onto the dolly, wheeled them to the staging area, bagged the Christmas lights and trail maps. Physical, methodical work, the kind your body does while your mind is 20 feet away on a steel shelf in 43 boxes you're not supposed to open. I want to be honest about what I did next because pretending I followed procedure would be a lie. I opened another box. This one was labeled Miss/Incomplete, date range 1974 to 1978. The folders inside had less structure, some with incident forms, some with just loose handwritten pages, some with photographs that had no identifying information attached. The organization was rougher, as if these were the files that didn't fit the system governing the other boxes. One folder contained a single sheet of paper, a hand-drawn map of the Tenaya Canyon drainage, the deep, steep gorge running from Tenaya Lake down to Mirror Lake in the valley. The map was detailed. Whoever drew it understood topography, contour lines, creek paths, trail intersections rendered in careful black ink, and along the creek, at irregular intervals, were small X marks, 11 of them, red ink, no legend, no key, no name, no case number, no explanation of any kind, just 11 red X's on a hand-drawn map of one of the most remote and dangerous drainages in Yosemite, and a date at the top, June 1976. I held that map under the fluorescent light and counted the marks twice. 11 points along a creek that drops through terrain so steep and so dense with undergrowth that the Park Service tells hikers not to enter it. 11 marks that someone placed deliberately in a different color at a different time than the base drawing. 11 whats? Campsites, geological features, search locations, recovery points. I didn't know. I still don't. But the red against the black was intentional, and the care with which each X was placed, small, precise, evenly inked, told me this wasn't casual. Someone had gone back to this map with a specific purpose. In another folder, I found what changed everything: a typed memorandum on Park Service letterhead, formal, official, addressed to the Chief Ranger's office from someone titled Case Review Coordinator, a title I'd never encountered and later couldn't find in any NPS organizational chart, dated March 14th, 1978. Subject line: Consolidation of Category C files, Yosemite. 3 paragraphs. I read them once, read them again, read them a third time with sweat beading on my forehead as the building heated around me. The first paragraph stated that per a directive from the regional office, all case files designated Category C were to be consolidated into a single storage location and removed from the active filing system. The second defined Category C cases in which the investigation had been concluded, no criminal activity determined, and the reporting officer's assessment was that the subject had departed the park boundary under their own volition, regardless of whether the subject had subsequently been located. The third stated that once consolidated, the files were not to be re-entered into the active system without written authorization from the regional director's office. Stripped of bureaucratic language, what this memo said was someone had created a special filing category for missing persons cases where the conclusion was that the person walked away. Then the regional office the administrative level above the park, ordered every one of those files pulled from the normal records system and stored here, not destroyed, not transferred to a central archive, stored locally in a maintenance building where they would exist physically, but not in any database, any index, any searchable system, real but unfindable, present but invisible. I put the memo in my pocket. I folded it once, placed it in the left breast pocket of my maintenance greens, buttoned the flap, closed the box, went back to cataloging furniture. When Dale radioed at 11:30 to say he'd left a message with admin, I said copy and kept working. I didn't mention the memo. That night, I sat in my housing unit, a small temporary structure in the Curry Village employee area, what we called a WOB, basically a canvas roofed cabin with 2 beds, 2 lockers, and a bare overhead bulb. My roommate Trevor was working a late shift. I had the place to myself. The memo was on my bed, unfolded, the letterhead sharp and official under the single light. I read it again. Then I opened my phone and navigated to the NPS website, to the Yosemite Missing Persons page. 3 names, officially open, officially unsolved, officially still missing. I had seen at least one of those names in a closed file that afternoon. I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at my notebook, the names I'd recorded, the dates, and I looked at the memo and I felt the specific vertigo of holding 2 contradictory realities in your hands simultaneously. The website said these cases were open, the files said they were closed. Both were produced by the same institution. Both carried the authority of the United States government, and they could not both be true. I should explain who I am, because it matters for what happened next. Paul Kessler, 27 years old, bachelor's degree in history from Cal State Fresno, 4 years of seminars on primary source analysis, historiography, archival methods, 18 months of student debt being slowly paid off by a $17 a week housing allowance in one of the most beautiful places on earth. Before Yosemite, I'd worked retail in Merced and hated every fluorescent lit minute of it. I took the Park Service job to be inside the park, breathing the air, touching the granite, hearing the falls at night. I wasn't a law enforcement ranger, an investigator, or a journalist. I was a maintenance worker who found something in a storage building. But a history degree teaches you one thing above everything else. Documents exist because someone created them for a reason. The question is always who wrote this, when, and why. And this memo existed because someone in 1978 wanted specific case files to become unfindable, not destroyed. That would leave a gap, an absence someone might notice, stored, preserved, but removed from every system that might surface them. That's not records management. That's the architecture of forgetting. And then I thought something I hadn't let myself think yet. I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if category C is a perfectly standard records designation that I've never encountered because I'm a maintenance worker, not an archivist? What if every one of those 216 people really did walk out of the park and start a new life? And this is just how the filing works? What if I'm about to destroy my career, the only job I've ever loved, the only place I've ever felt like I belonged, over a bureaucratic procedure I don't understand? I sat with that for a long time. The housing unit was quiet. Through the canvas roof, I could hear a very faint roar. Yosemite Falls, 2 miles away, audible only on still nights when the valley held its breath. I thought about the name I'd recognized, the person listed as missing on the website and closed in the files. I thought about the red X's on the Tenaya Canyon map. I thought about the words "no further action" written in blue ballpoint at the bottom of a page about a 22-year-old who walked onto a trail and never walked off it. And I decided that even if I was wrong, these families had a right to know these files existed. The next morning, September 12th, I went back to building 2217 at 7:15. I spent the first hour finishing the furniture inventory. Then I went to the back shelf. I worked systematically, pulled each box, opened it, counted the folders, recorded every name and date range in my notebook. I didn't remove anything, didn't photograph anything, just made a list, box by box, name by name, 4 hours. My back ached from bending. My fingers were gray with dust. The building heated as the sun climbed, the metal roof ticking and expanding. When I finished, I had 216 names, 216 individual missing person case files spanning 1943 to 1997, 54 years. Everyone designated Category C. Everyone closed with the same notation or a variation. Concluded subject left park voluntarily. No evidence of foul play. NFA. 216 people over half a century. All concluded to have simply walked out of Yosemite, all filed in boxes behind a row of cedar trees, 40 yards from a visitor center where tourists bought postcards. I sat on an overturned bucket. The interior was stifling, easily 90 degrees, the air thick and still. I could hear the shuttle bus outside, country music from a truck radio in the lot, a woodpecker hammering in the cedars, and I sat there with my notebook and the number 216 and the afternoon light pressing through the single dirty window high on the east wall, casting a pale rectangle on the concrete floor that slowly moved as the earth turned. And I thought, how many of these people have families that are still waiting? On the afternoon of September 12th, I did something I've since been told was a federal offense. I pulled the files for the three names on the NPS website, the officially open, officially unsolved cases, and I read them completely. Every page, every photograph, every handwritten note. I won't name the three people. I've been advised not to, but I will describe what I found because the public deserves to know and because nobody with authority to act has chosen to. The first file was the oldest. A young woman, a backpacker, last seen in 1981 near the High Sierra camps. Her file was thin. The initial search lasted 8 days. Ground teams, helicopter, tracking dogs. Two witnesses saw her on the trail heading south toward Vogelsang. The lead investigator's summary was 3 typed pages, single-spaced, clear and analytical. In his final paragraph, he wrote that he believed the subject had been the victim of a crime, but had been unable to develop sufficient evidence to pursue the investigation at that time. He formally recommended the case remain open and that additional interviews be conducted the following season when seasonal staff returned. Clipped to his recommendation was a single sheet, different paper, different typewriter, dated 4 months later. A case status change form redesignating the case as Category C. Status: closed. Reason: concluded subject departed park boundary. The signature was not the lead investigators. It was someone in the regional office, an administrator in San Francisco who had never walked the trail, never spoken to the witnesses, never looked at the campsite. The man who spent 8 days searching for this woman, who wrote in plain language that he believed a crime had occurred, was overruled by someone who concluded she simply walked away. The second file was from 1997, a solo hiker, male, mid-40s. His car was found at a trailhead near Tuolumne Meadows after he failed to check out of the backcountry permit system. The search lasted 12 days. His tent was found at a campsite below the Cathedral Range. His sleeping bag was inside. His food was sealed in the bear canister. His boots were in the tent vestibule, side by side, neatly placed. His wallet was in the interior zip pocket. $40 in cash, driver's license. The investigating ranger wrote one sentence I haven't stopped thinking about since I read it. In my professional assessment, the physical evidence at the campsite is consistent with a subject who left the tent intending to return within minutes, not with a subject who departed voluntarily. A man stepped barefoot out of his tent to relieve himself, to check a sound, to look at the stars, and never came back. 5 months later, the regional office checked a box that said voluntary departure. The third file was the one that changed me. I need you to understand that I went into this building as one person and I came out as someone else. And the third file is why. It was from 1989. A man in his 30s, a day hiker on a popular trail. Standard file at first. Incident report, witness statements, search documentation. But stapled behind the standard materials was something the other files didn't have. A supplemental investigation report filed 14 months after the initial search was suspended. A different ranger wrote it. Not the original investigator. Someone else. Someone who had been bothered enough to keep working the case on his own time without assignment or authorization. He'd interviewed the missing man's family, obtained phone records, pulled financial records, no post-disappearance activity, and then he'd done something extraordinary. He pulled 4 other missing persons files from the preceding decade and compared them. My hands were damp on the paper. The building was an oven now, the roof radiating heat downward, the air thick and unmoving, and I could feel my own pulse in my fingertips as I turned each page, and outside through the walls, I could hear children laughing on the path to the visitor center, that high, clear sound of kids on vacation, and I was reading about 5 people who vanished from the same stretch of wilderness, while the same office shut down every investigation from a desk 200 miles away. All 5 subjects were solo hikers. All 5 had been on trails accessing the north rim of the valley or the Tenaya Canyon drainage. The same gorge marked with those 11 red X's on the map I'd found hours earlier. All 5 had been concluded as voluntary departures, and in every case, the conclusion came not from the ranger in the field, but from the regional office, overriding the field investigator's recommendation. The supplemental report was 12 pages, single-spaced, methodical, footnoted. The ranger who wrote it had done real investigative work, the kind that requires patience and conviction and the willingness to spend your own unpaid hours because you believe something is wrong and no one else is looking. His conclusion was measured. He didn't make accusations. He didn't claim certainty. He wrote in his final paragraph that the geographic clustering, the demographic similarities, and the consistent pattern of administrative override constituted sufficient grounds to recommend that all 5 cases be reopened and that a dedicated investigator examine whether the pattern of North Rim disappearances represented a serial criminal act. Those were his words: serial criminal act, 5 people, same drainage, same victim profile, same institutional response. Close it, box it, shelf it. Attached to the last page was a response from the regional office, dated 3 weeks later, 1 paragraph. It thanked him for his diligence, noted his concerns had been reviewed, informed him the cases would remain closed. The final sentence said his supplemental report would be filed with the original case materials. Filed here, in this building, in a box on a shelf behind Christmas lights and broken furniture, where it sat for 34 years until a maintenance worker with a work order scraped open a stuck door and found it by accident. I put the folder down carefully on top of the box. My hands were trembling, a fine vibration I couldn't control. I walked out of Building 2217 into the gravel lot, and the sunlight hit me, and the heat pressed against my face and my arms, and the contrast between the cool, stale dark I'd been sitting in and the blazing September afternoon was so sharp it felt like breaking a surface, like coming up from underwater. A shuttle bus passed on the loop road, faces in the windows, cameras out. A family, 2 parents, 2 children in Yosemite souvenir hats, walked toward the visitor center. A ground squirrel ran across the gravel. The sky was deep blue. The granite walls of the valley were white in direct sun. El Capitan to the west, Half Dome to the east, enormous and ancient and beautiful. And I stood there in the lot with my hands shaking and a coldness in my stomach that had nothing to do with temperature. And I understood something I had not understood 30 minutes before. A system had decided repeatedly, deliberately, across decades, that it was better for these people to have walked away than for anyone to ask where they actually went. Not one bad decision, not one lazy investigator. A system, a directive on letterhead with a subject line and a signature and a filing procedure, implemented across 54 years and 216 human beings who walked into this park and didn't walk out. I didn't go back into the building. I finished logging what I'd staged, locked the padlock, walked back to my housing unit through the trees, sat on my bed with the notebook and the memo and the number that was going to be in my head for the rest of my life. That evening, I called my mother in Merced. I didn't tell her what I'd found. She asked how work was going, and I said fine. She told me my aunt was having knee surgery. She asked if I was eating enough. I said I was. We talked for 8 minutes about nothing that mattered and everything that mattered, and I said I loved her, and hung up, and sat in the silence, and thought about 216 phone calls that never came, 216 families who waited for their person to check in, to come home, to call from a gas station in Mariposa or a bus depot in Fresno, and the calls never arrived. And then a letter came instead, or a ranger in a flat hat knocked on the door, and the family was told their person was missing, and years passed, and the case stayed open on a website, and the actual file sat in a box in a building behind a row of cedar trees with the word closed written at the bottom in blue ballpoint pen. I walked to the employee gym and sat in the parking lot on a concrete bumper and watched the last light leave Half Dome. That 15-minute window at sunset when the granite catches the final rays and goes from white to gold to amber to pink to a deep rose that has no name, and then gray, and then just stone, just rock in the dark. I'd watched it dozens of times. It was the reason I took the job. It was what made the bathroom cleaning and the broken toilets worth it. That light on that stone. I watched it go dark, and I went inside, and I knew what I was going to do. Here is what I should have done: reported it through proper channels, walked into the law enforcement ranger station, asked for a supervisor, laid out the discrepancy between the website and the files, handed over the notebook and the memo, let the system work. Here is why I didn't. The system had already worked. It worked in 1978 when someone created Category C and ordered the files pulled. It worked in the 80s and 90s when field investigators wrote their recommendations and watched them get overridden by administrators who never left their offices. It worked when a ranger spent 14 months of his own time writing 12 pages connecting 5 disappearances in the same drainage, and the system thanked him for his diligence and filed his report in the same building as the cases he was trying to reopen. The system had worked perfectly for 54 years. It had produced 216 names on a shelf that nobody checked, and the system wasn't broken. The system was functioning as designed. So, on September 13th, my third and final day on the clear out, I made a choice. I brought my phone and a USB drive, arrived at 7, an hour early, opened the building, went to the back shelf, and I photographed the files. Not all of them. Not enough time. Not enough battery. I photographed the 3 files matching the officially open cases, the 12-page supplemental report, every page, both sides, the 1978 consolidation memo, plus a second copy found in a different box, the 5 North Rim case files the supplement connected, and the handwritten indexes taped inside each box lid. 63 photographs total, taken on a seasonal maintenance worker's personal phone in a building he'd been assigned to clear for asbestos work. By 9, I was done. I spent the rest of the morning finishing the non-paper clear-out. The boxes stayed on the shelf. I put yellow painter's tape across the front and wrote, "Do not remove. Admin hold in Sharpie." Standard practice when tagged property needed to stay in place. I figured it would buy the boxes time. I filed the clear-out form with Dale at noon, told him the front was clear, the paperwork in back was untouched. He said admin would send someone. Probably next week. I said okay. Went to lunch, ate a sandwich in the cafeteria, and looked out the window at people walking toward Yosemite Falls and felt like I was carrying something heavy and breakable inside my chest. On September 14th, I emailed a reporter at the Fresno Bee, chose them because they were the largest regional paper covering Yosemite, and their investigative work was serious. 3 paragraphs describing what I'd found in general terms. I said I had documentation. I asked if they were interested in meeting. Personal email sent from the gym Wi-Fi, sitting on a bench while 2 mule deer grazed in the meadow in front of me. She responded in 2 hours. Elena Voss, 6 years covering Yosemite and the Sierra. She asked if I could meet in Mariposa on Saturday. I said yes. Friday the 15th was a normal work day. Bathroom rounds at 4. Faucet cartridge in housing unit 14. Bear box repaint in Upper Pines. The valley filling up for the September weekend. At 3 in the afternoon, Dale radioed me to the maintenance office. When I arrived, he was standing with a woman in formal MPS green and gray. Administrative branch. She said she was coordinating retrieval of the materials in Building 2, 217, She asked me to describe what I'd observed. I told her boxes, folders, incident reports. She asked if I'd opened any boxes. I said yes, to check for property tags per the work order. She asked if I'd read any contents. I looked at Dale. Dale was looking at the floor, arms crossed, jaw set. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I said I'd glanced at a few pages to determine the type of paperwork. She said thank you. The materials would be retrieved Monday. She left without another question. Dale told me to take the rest of the day. He didn't say why. He didn't look at me when he said it. For the first time since opening that building, I felt fear. Not about the files, about being the person who found them. A specific, cold understanding that I was alone with information that an institution had spent decades keeping hidden, and the institution now knew I'd seen it. Saturday, September 16th. I drove to Mariposa and met Elena at a coffee shop on Highway 140. She was in her 40s, notebook and recorder on the table. I showed her the photographs, the notebook, the memo, 2 hours of careful, specific questions. She was most interested in the supplemental report, the 12 pages, the 5 connected cases, the North Rim pattern. She asked if I'd go on the record. I said yes. She asked if I understood it could cost me my job. I said yes. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was 27 years old with a history degree and a notebook full of names, and I believed those families had a right to know their person's file existed and that someone had investigated and someone else had shut it down. Elena worked the story for 3 weeks. FOIA requests, family contacts, NPS Public Affairs, who said the matter was under internal review. On October 2nd, I was called into a meeting with Dale and the district facility manager, Warren Griggs. Griggs told me an investigation had been opened into unauthorized disclosure of law enforcement records. He said the files were law enforcement sensitive material. He said photographing and distributing them was a federal records violation. He told me I was on administrative leave. He asked for my keys, my radio, and my ID badge. I unclipped them, laid them on the table. Dale walked me to my housing unit. Outside, in the shade of the oaks along the employee path, he said quietly that he was sorry, that he thought what I'd found deserved to be looked into. Then he said he couldn't say anything more and left. I watched him walk back toward the maintenance compound, and I thought about the ranger who wrote that supplemental report, whether someone had walked him out too 34 years ago, whether he'd stood in this valley and watched someone turn their back on what he'd found. 4 days of limbo. Trevor didn't know. I hiked Mirror Lake at dawn, sat on the Merced Bridge watching the current, ate in the cafeteria with my head down, checked email compulsively. Elena was still working, waiting for FOIA, waiting for family responses. On October 6th, a certified letter, seasonal appointment terminated, effective immediately, violation of conditions of employment relating to handling of sensitive government records, 72 hours to vacate, 2 duffel bags, a box of books, boots, tools. Trevor helped carry things to my truck and said he was sorry. I drove out through the Arch Rock entrance in late afternoon. The canyon was golden, that October light that turns the Merced to liquid amber. The oaks along the road were starting to turn at their edges, green going to yellow. I cried once, hard, between El Portal and Mariposa. A single convulsion of grief that came from somewhere I hadn't known was full. Then I drove to Merced. Elena published on October 19th, 2023. Fresno B. Secret files found in Yosemite storage building reveal decades of missing persons cases closed without resolution. She detailed Category C, the memo, the supplemental report, the overriding of investigators, quoted me by name, quoted a family member, a woman whose brother vanished in 1981, who said she'd been told for 42 years the Park Service was still looking, quoted a retired NPS investigator who called the system deeply troubling. NPS Public Affairs said they were committed to transparency. The story ran hot for 4 days. Sacramento TV picked it up. A true crime podcast called. I declined. 2 California Congress members wrote Interior requesting a briefing. The families filed their own FOIAs, then silence. The specific institutional silence that isn't absence, but strategy. No updates, no follow up, no second stories. Just a news cycle turning over and a bureaucracy waiting for attention to move on, the way it always does, the way it has for 54 years. Elena told me, weeks later, that during her reporting she tried to locate the ranger who wrote the supplemental report. She found a name, a retirement date, 1994, and an address in a small town in northern Montana. She wrote him a letter. He never responded. She said she didn't know if he'd received it or if he'd chosen not to engage. But she said something else that I've thought about often. She said that when she'd spoken to her source inside the park about the ranger, her source had gone quiet for a moment and then said, "He tried. He really tried. And then he left." On September 18th, the Monday after the admin woman's visit, a team from the park's administrative and law enforcement divisions entered Building 2217 and removed all 43 boxes, transported to the park records facility. Elena confirmed through her source. After that, nothing. The FOIA responses came back 4 months later, exempt under law enforcement and privacy provisions. All 3 open cases remain listed on the NPS website as unsolved. No new information released. The supplemental report has never been publicly acknowledged. The congressional letters received a response saying an internal review was underway. No report has been issued. Elena hasn't seen one. The families haven't. Congress hasn't. Here is what happened to me. I've applied for seasonal positions at 3 different parks, 4 times total. Qualified on the cert list every time. Never interviewed. Dale told me the following spring, in the careful tone of a man choosing words with legal awareness, that my name had come up in a hiring conversation at Sequoia and the context was not favorable. The federal park system is small. Supervisors talk. A word is enough. I'm not a whistleblower in any legally protected sense. The Whistleblower Protection Act covers disclosures to specific authorized channels. I gave files to a journalist. I was a temporary employee without civil service protections. No standing to challenge anything. What I lost that can't be recovered isn't a job. It's Yosemite, not the park. I can drive in tomorrow with a day pass. What I lost was the version where I woke at 3:30 and walked to the restrooms in the dark and the valley was empty and mine, where I heard the falls from my housing unit on still nights, where I watched a black bear cross the Curry Village lot at dawn like it owned the place, where the granite changed color every hour, gray, white, gold, pink, amber, and you stopped whatever you were doing and looked. where my job was small and physical and specific, and I was good at it, and I belonged. I belonged somewhere. That's what I lost. Not a paycheck, a place. I live in Merced. I work at a Home Depot. I'm good at plumbing because of the Park Service. 2 nights ago, a customer asked if I'd been to Yosemite. I said yes. He asked if it's as beautiful as the pictures. I said it's more. He said he was taking his family next weekend. I told him to get there early. I told him to watch the light on Half Dome at sunset. He pushed his cart down the aisle, and I stood under the fluorescent lights with a box of PVC couplings in my hands and waited for the feeling to pass. I go back as a visitor sometimes. Valley Loop, lunch at Dignan's. I walk past Building 2217 near the visitor center, chain link fence now. Yellow asbestos signs zip tied to the mesh. The building is sealed. 3 weeks ago, a letter arrived at my mother's house. Plain white envelope, no return address. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter with the afternoon light coming through the window. My mother in the next room watching television. The ordinary sounds of a house in Merced. Inside was a single photocopied sheet, an NPS internal memorandum. Header: Yosemite National Park, Division of Resource Management and Science. Subject: Records Consolidation. Yost Storage Annex, Building 2217 Replacement. One paragraph. The transfer of archived case materials to a new secure location within the park's administrative compound. I don't know who sent it. I've decided not to try to find out because the content matters more than the source, and because whoever took the risk of mailing it wanted me to know one thing: the final sentence. All Category C files have been re-indexed and transferred per Regional Directive 2024-11. Effective date of transfer, January 8th, 2024. They didn't review the files. They didn't reopen the cases. They didn't investigate the pattern of 5 people vanishing from the same drainage while the same office closed every case. They didn't contact the families. They didn't release the supplemental report. They didn't answer a single question that the families, the journalist, or the 2 members of Congress asked them. They moved the boxes to a new building, a building with a lock I don't have the combination to, in a location I'll never be assigned to clear, because I will never work for the National Park Service again. 216 names, 54 years, the same filing system, the same institutional verdict that these people walked away, and that nobody needs to ask whether that's true. A new shelf,